The other day I posted a blog about getting under the bar for a hip thrust, and I had a few ladies write in asking about proper foot placement for both the hip thrust and the glute bridge. So I'd like to go over those with you today. I am set up to do a hip thrust, and I think foot placement on that is a little bit easier than it is with a glute bridge, so I will start with that. Now, the most important thing is where you're hinging your back on the bench. So I went over that the other day, and Brett Contreras did a great video on everything you need to know about the hip thrust, so you might want to check that out as well. But here you want the top of the bench to be right under your shoulder blades, and you want your feet about hip to shoulder width apart, pointing straight out in front of you. Now, you don't want them too close up to you, and you'll notice why when you start going up, because you're going to end up coming up on your toes. So here, it might be easier before you put the weight on, is to gauge where should my feet be to come up at a 90-degree angle. And this is where you're going to get the best glute contraction. And then just lean back down from there, and you can really see where your foot placement is. You don't want your toes pointed out too far and your feet too wide, because you're not going to get the best glute contraction. You don't want your feet together, because then you're working more of your adductors or your inner thighs than your glutes. So shoulder width apart, and when you come up on the hip thrust, you want to create a good 90-degree angle with your leg, so your knee is the center of that angle. Another thing I want to note is keeping your heels on the floor, so you don't want to come up on your toes. You'll see that I do that in the first hip thrust video that Brett ever posted of me. I was new to the exercise. So don't come up on your toes. You're not working your calves here. As far as driving with your heels and really digging your heels into the ground and picking your toes up off the floor, that is a great option. I'll do that sometimes, especially when I'm doing a higher rep. You might feel that you get a greater contraction doing that. Now onto the glute bridge, which is a little bit more elusive on trying to figure out your foot placement and the proper hinge versus the hip thrust. The hip thrust, you're going to create that nice 90-degree angle from your calf up to your thigh. Pretty easy to figure out. But the glute bridge is a lot of tinkering, and what you really want to focus on is where you get the best peak contraction. So when you're in your bridge, really pay attention to what you're feeling. If you're feeling a lot of hamstring, then your feet might be out too far from your body. If you're feeling a lot of low back, then your feet might be a little too close. So you want that nice glute contraction at the top of the movement. And with the glute bridge, you're going to feel it more in your lower glutes than you are in your upper glutes. So pay attention to that as well. I like to kind of come to the end of my exercise mat, so my feet are off the mat and it's not as cushioned. So you do get more of that energy and that heel drive going. And for me, what I learned when doing these is you want a good 6 to 7 inches between where your heel is placed and your glute. So I have sort of long fingers, so I like to have this nice space from the tip of my index finger to my thumb in between where my heel is and where my glute is placed. So you don't want them too close. You don't want them right up on your glutes, because then you're going to come up too high and you feel it a lot in your low back. And then you'll notice when you place them farther out, you're coming down really low, your hamstrings are firing hard, but you're not really feeling it in your glutes. So a good 6 to 7 inches, which you can use your fingers as a measure, is great placement or a great distance between. And then you'll notice when you come up at your peak contraction, your glutes should be firing hard. Again, on this, you want your feet to be about shoulder width apart. I kind of like to slightly turn my toes out. So you either want them facing forward or slightly turned out. You don't want your legs too far out, because then you're really working your outer glutes and your abductors. Too close in puts a lot of strain on your knees. You don't get as high of a contraction, and you'll really feel your adductors working rather than your glutes. So don't stress your knees out. Make sure you're shoulder width apart, about 6 inches from your heel to your glute, and then you get that nice peak contraction at the top. Again, on this, you don't want to come up on your toes. Heel drive is a personal preference. I do kind of like to drive through my heels and really push into my glutes, especially when I'm doing higher reps or I'm trying to go for a new PR and I want to push really hard and get my glutes firing as much as they possibly can.